Well, I think that was a great kick-off to what is a very deep and wide set of issues. We're going to continue with some of the thematics that I think Dan picked up with the next speaker, Nick Gruen. Nick is a distinguished blogger and commentator on the intersection between economics and good social policy. And he's going to talk to us today about his perspectives on the way in which public interest and the public good can actually be thought about in the frameworks that we're talking about. So I'll just...
Here we go.
That's it. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you for about 30 minutes and leave about 10 for questions, I hope. That is an outline of what I'm going to talk about. You may throw jaffas or generally interrupt if you want to, and just challenge me or ask me a question, and ignore the cat. Okay, so we're in a world at the moment which is very much taken with the idea that progress is driven by the market, and I want to suggest to you that if we look at the economic development of our world over the last 200 years, which has taken us, almost all of us, from subsistence to luxury, there's another part of that story. It's absolutely integral, and we're now in the 18th century, and there's central banking, the Navy, merchant and military Navy had two major problems. They kept bumping into continents in the middle of the night, and the sailors all died. Now, you could say that what they needed was more competition, build more ships and so on, and that would achieve a little bit, but there were some public goods that were missing of know-how, and those two bits of knowledge were provided in the 18th century. In fact, people knew from about the 15th century that lemons helped scurvy, but it took several hundred years for that information to circulate properly. And of course, the other picture there is Harrison's clock, which solved the longitude problem. There's joint stock companies, another public good. That is a piece of legal apparatus that enabled capital to be applied much more effectively to all sorts of problems, and of course to create all sorts of problems. We're now in the 19th century. You'll see the hat indicates that. That's my primary school, which was built by the Lutherans but bought by the Victorian government in the 1860s. And the 19th century saw public education, public sanitation, a public service chosen on merit. That was an idea that they stole from the Chinese, who'd been doing that for about 1,000 years. Central banknotes. I could talk to you about central banknotes for about an hour, but I won't. So here's here's an informal definition of a public good, and there's an economist's definition of a public good. A public good is a problem. Why is a public good a problem? Because markets don't spontaneously produce public goods. But here are some, we're now in the 21st century, I'm looking for hats, and that's really not going to cut the mustard, so we'll just have to go with something like that. So there are some public goods of the 21st century, and not one of them was built by the government. Some of them are built for profit. Some of them were built for philanthropic purposes. So we have an explosion of new public goods to go along with the explosion of innovation and remarkable market development that we see all around us in the 21st century. So my little way of looking at public goods, which is different to the economic textbook, contains the economic textbook, if you like. If I had as much if I had some chutzpah, I would call it a general theory, I suppose. But anyway, we have the public goods over here that are in the textbook, but there are also what I call emergent public goods. And get this, the most fundamental public good, which doesn't appear in a textbook and didn't get built by the government, is language. We all kind of built that together. And it is now taking wing again as executive code, open source software, an incredible thing. Language encoded eternally, executive does stuff, a public good when it's open source. And then we have all these things that somebody builds a platform for profit or philanthropically, and then we build a public good on that platform. So here's a problem. Lemons cure scurvy. They cured scurvy in the 18th century. We're now back in the 21st century. The problem is that social capital is damaged in parts of our society, and lemons cure scurvy, but they don't cure a lack of social capital. We're not very good at working out what to do. It's a hard problem. I'm not going to wave a wand and solve it for you, but I hope I will offer you some food for thought. And one of the things is that we're comfortable with the idea that self-interest is a powerful force. It is a powerful force, and it's easily put into economic models, which is a matter of some comfort for quite a lot of economists. And we are concerned that, is there anything powerful in us that's driving this other side of our society, social capital? Well, I want to suggest to you the answer is yes, and I'll show you two videos to try and demonstrate that. There's the first one. These are good fun videos, I hope you agree.
Jessica, 9 months old, gets to watch a puppet show.
Okay, here we go.
While the striped puppet seems to want to play ball, Green Jacket is having none of it.
Here we go.
Orange Jacket, on the other hand, is happy to join in.
See? Hi. Who do you like? That one. Good job. That was the nice bunny.
That was really
good job.
In many similar experiments with babies only a few months old, the infants almost always choose the cooperating puppet.
One thing that's clearly true of the human species is that we're a profoundly cooperative social species, where cooperation is necessary to survival, and where mutual cooperation is required, and the ability to detect mutual cooperators and also to detect those who are not cooperating is essential.
Oh, that was a truncated version. You were about to be shown exactly the same exercise, but not with fluffy dolls, but with triangles and squares, and exactly the same phenomenon occurs. Some of you will have seen that. So that's the sort of helpfulness side. There's another side. We'll have to move on. There's another side to this. Again, some of you may have seen this video, but this is the other side, the punitive side, the what about me side. Have a look.
Is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece he eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. cucumber again.
So you can see that we're made of powerful stuff.
It is a monkey.
Okay. So that's inside us. There seems to be the makings of something that works quite well. But then we run into this thing which is a marvellous expression from Warren Buffett, the institutional imperative. Now, he's actually talking about a whole lot of pathologies of business, largely, about the obsession in business to grow rather than to manage capital in the best possible way. And he's not making a point about selflessness. He's making a point about unenlightened selfishness, if you like. He's simply talking about the most efficient, most beneficial way of managing capital for owners, and the market doesn't provide that. But in the area that but I see this in all sorts of other areas. All of the institutions that we've built to reflect the side of our character that you saw in those two videos seem to somehow go in another direction towards institutional imperatives, which are not the things that the institutions have been built for. This is a girl called Mystique, and she was taken from her family when she was about 3 years old because her family were not looking after her, and she was put in out-of-home care. And then when she turned 18, she was chucked out of home care because, of course, the institution she was no longer of any concern to the institution. In fact, she'd become a risk to the institution, and she was told that she wasn't allowed to contact all the people who she had come to know and love in that institution. Now, that might seem extreme to you, but that's going on right now. And that's going on, that is being delivered by people who went to uni, did social work, and wanted to make the world a bit better for people like Mystique. Really something to ponder. That's the mission statement at the bottom of that organisation, and that's a statement from, it might have been Mystique, but I got that quote from another pathway. One of the problems we have, and part of the institutional dysfunction, the institutional imperative, if you like, is cliches. So I've just shown you a cliche. That one, we work closely with families. You saw how closely they work with families. And the public service will tell you the buzzwords of the last, of 10 years ago was that they were citizen-centric. If you put that into Google, you'll get 184,000 hits. It's amazing how citizen-centric everyone is saying they're becoming. Putting people first, that's 405,000 hits. So that's maybe not a way to get there. We have to try and work out sort of tools, just like Dan was saying. And this is one tool, one thing one can do. Can anyone who hasn't seen that picture before tell me what this person, who the hell is this person, what the hell is he doing?
That's a record of what they're doing to it.
Sort of, yeah, he is. That's what he's trying to do. He's a designer. He's designing a hospital. Makes sense, doesn't it? And what do you think he looks at when he plays the video? Who knew? Ignore the cat. So I came, as an economist, I came across, as I was asked to chair the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, and I bumped into this discipline called design, which again is a bit of a fad, it's kind of at the crest of the hype cycle at the moment, or maybe a couple of years ago, because business are talking about design thinking. But there is something extremely powerful about design. I think of it as a discipline of being cross-disciplinary, as a kind of a counter-narrative or a disruption, which, when everybody else is focusing on very specific things, the discipline of design says that the way you design something is you try, and there are lots of techniques for doing this, to look at the thing from every angle that you can think of and put something together that works as well as possible for everyone, which doesn't sound like a very precise statement, but that's the task that it gives itself, at least according to this way of thinking. And so I also think that this leads to a powerful way of thinking about social programs and social policy through a lens of empathy, if you like. But also, I would like to say that this is, just speaking personally, this is as much a rage against the institutional imperative as it is some embrace of some soft, lovely thing like empathy. The institutional imperative is, for me, a matter of rage. So here's design, and I'll show you something that shocked me. This is from the Deloitte Australia homepage, and these are the values of design, but there is an apex value, which certainly surprised me. But when you think about it, it's a worthwhile thing to think about. The human capacity for empathy is one of the driving forces, one of the psychological drivers that enables design, that drives design, and that design is built around. And here we have the patron saint of economics, Adam Smith. Adam Smith is famous in these days for having written The Wealth of Nations over nearly 250 years ago. That's about private goods in markets. And those who know him better will also know that he published, before The Wealth of Nations, another book which he was fonder of and which the public were fonder of at the time, called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And one reason he would never have used a term like social capital or public good in the way that I have, but The Theory of Moral Sentiments is about the way in which cultures bind people together in webs of cooperation. In other words, it's about social capital as a public good, as an enabler of our society. It begins, how selfish soever a man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortunes of others and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. Now, Smith's first lecturing job was as a lecturer in rhetoric, and Smith was seeking in these two books to perpetrate rhetoric according to what he called the Newtonian method. And this is something that David Hume had got excited about. We're talking about the Scottish Enlightenment here. And what they were trying to do, what Smith was trying to do, was to take a single thing, a single characteristic of humanity that was innate, he asserted, and then to spin out of it everything that we want to know about us as a theory which gives us some mastery over the subject. And in The Wealth of Nations, that single tendency was the tendency to truck, barter and exchange. And out of that comes 1,000 pages of economics. the theory of moral sentiments, human culture, where does it come from, what is the apex, in the way that gravity and the inverse square law was the apex of Newton's system? Sympathy. And this is at a time, and actually what the closest word that we have for what Smith meant by sympathy was empathy. There was no word empathy at the time, and Smith didn't mean sort of gooey feelings and feeling nice about people, or compassion to some extent, but actually it's an epistemological idea. And here it is, I think, if the slide order is correct. We can only know what others think by putting ourselves in their situation, then we feel like them. Those are not the words of Smith, those are the words of Charles Darwin, who got his whole idea of survival of the fittest from economics, would you believe? So the way I look at the world is that the world is a fractal or nested ecology of public and private goods. So on the left-hand side, you have private goods. These are things that can compete with each other, individuals, firms, teams, and each of them is made up of, and on that side, there is competition and self-interest, and on the other side, these, and I think one of the best ways of illustrating this, firms is a good example, but football teams is an even better one. Football teams, what are they obsessed with? Solidarity and competition. Maybe solidarity more than competition. Certainly our heroes are people who acted selflessly, not people who acted, if you think about the great icons of our culture, they're people who acted with cooperation and group interest. There is a scene outside the State Library that is a nested ecology of public and private goods. The chess board, there are public goods around, people are running their own conversations, they're looking after their own interest, they're building group interest. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what our social world is built on. And it's around that idea that TAXI, the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, which I chair, built a completely different social program. We were asked to try and build an early intervention program to prevent families falling into crisis. How the hell would you do that? I wouldn't know. What we did was we hung around with families and we gradually built a family mentoring scheme. But this is a highly articulated, professionally developed and evidence-based scheme, and instead of counselling by people who they don't relate to, this is therapy delivered through an empathic bond. That is the control panel, a set of empty bubbles where people write in the centre a goal that they want to work on, 3 things that will help them work on that goal, and 3 things that will get better about their lives as they work on those goals. And I will now play you a video which has some of those people some of the people in the program talking. It goes for about 4 minutes.
Family by Family is one of the most inspiring approaches to assisting very vulnerable families going through a tough time, that I've come across in 4 decades.
Family by Family is a network of families connecting with other families. One family have been through tough times and helping another family that are going through tough times.
Lots of people are in that bit where they're trying to get through it and they can't get out the other side, so you can kind of go, you know what, I did this, I've been here, I've done that. I can actually get out. I can help you get out the other side. It can be done. It's not a completely hopeless situation. And I think that's mostly what sharing families have to offer, I think, is just themselves and their stories and their life.
Hi, I'm Linda and we're a seeking family from Playford.
When we met Linda and her family, they were going through a really hard time. They were at risk of having their family separated by having the children removed from the home.
27 notifications in in the last 3 years before this year.
What we saw was a very sad, depressed family. There was a lot of confusion
They
happening.
wanted to take the kids till they were 18. I went through court for 3 months.
How can we help with this? Because we're just as dysfunctional as the next family. But then we realised that we'd actually learnt a lot of things that we could really help Linda with.
Michelle and David have just coaxed me along, and fantastic to go through court, having the support behind me and not losing my kids. I'm looking at a happier future with my kids.
I'm Sue. I'm a seeking family. I'm a single parent with 4 children. My 9-year-old son has some special needs. He was too young for it to be labelled, so it got labelled as developmental delays, which is an umbrella thing. Since then, I've been knocking on doors and screaming and crying and whatever for help.
We have guest speakers giving us training, for example, from Autism SA. That was particularly significant with Sue because I was able to pass on that information.
Instead of me telling me, no, I'm useless, I'm this, that and the other, I've got someone saying, no, you are a good mum, you do a good job, So, it's just, that helps immensely.
Just seeing her come alive, the way that she holds herself compared to the way that she did when I first met her is just, she actually, stands tall and smiles.
Now, life is it's just going to get better. It's as good as it can get for me at the moment, I believe,
I'll skip that one. One way of putting this, hang on, I should press that button now. One way I like to think of this, you will have heard of behavioural economics and behavioural insights and so on. And one way of talking about that is that that's just applying the insights of behavioural economics, which exist as a bunch of tips and tricks like nudging people towards the salad rather than the hamburgers. And I think of that, I think a better way of thinking about that is that both of these ways of operating are actually about showing some actual curiosity about the other, of actually making that journey to the other. In the case of nudge units, usually that's easily scalable. Things like A/B testing of tax letters, of tax arrears letters improves responses, and the sort of work we do at the Centre for Social Innovation is much more about deep engagement and rebuilding the kinds of institutions that we have. Quickly then, this is what happened to Nokia when Apple came out with and Google came out with the iPhone and Android. Nokia stopped making as many mobile phones. That isn't the way, that's how a market works. That isn't the way a government works. So a government has got all these programs, it's got all these constituents who run the programs, and they'll run lots of political campaigns telling you that we're being callous and cruel if we don't use their services and instead use some other people's services. That's a really big problem, I think, and there is also some thinking that needs to be done about the fact that if you have a successful if you successfully address social capital deficits, that's very hard to contain within the silos of a particular portfolio responsibility. So to take family by family, I call that a social capital intervention. There is an immense social benefit that comes from that. A lot of that some of that social benefit is a private benefit to the people, so governments don't need to fund that. That's where we're funded from, within child protection. But the program has other benefits even within the same portfolio, for instance, domestic violence. Then there is all sorts of other things, education, mental health, and so on. So the way that governments have got to thinking about contracting out is they just sort of buy in these services and all of the services are all siloed. And I think in a summary way, you can appreciate how that doesn't work very well. It barely works at all. So there's a fair bit of thinking to be done there. One suggestion that I have, having spoken to someone from South Australia who was under Treasurer for a while, or Secretary of the Treasury, is that we could establish something like a social infrastructure fund, some small amount of money which one would hope to grow, which would be used to fund programs like this, and you would need to, but the idea is that you might be able to rebuild a whole lot of services through a program like this. Imagine remedial teaching and things like that through a school paired with a program like this. Mental health, dealing with mental health of parents, of children, or children themselves, and so on. I don't really have time to go into that a lot, but happy to do so in questions, and we'll leave you with the words of Saint Adam. Thank you.
Well, that was an extraordinarily powerful fly through 250 years of economic and social theory and thought and implementation. We've got time for about 2 or 3 questions, which I'm sure many of you will have in the light of what Nick has been saying. Nick, I'll let you choose the questioner, and who wants to go first?
Yeah.
This notion of economic growth being panacea for nearly everything.
Yeah. Growth. Yeah. When we drive through suburbs now, I put my head out the window and I announce to the suburb that the budget is a plan for jobs and growth. It's very important that you know that.
So do I.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Labor Party has 100 positive plans. I don't want to be partisan about this. 100.
Excellent. So environmentalists have been saying for some time that economic growth is contraindicated to sustainability.
Yeah.
In terms of consuming more stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think there is some implication in relation to public goods, social capital, or just our mindset about how we treat others, and this notion that there's an unlimited supply of things?
Well, there is an unlimited supply. I mean, part of what I was talking about with public goods is that there's a marvellous quote from Thomas Jefferson where he says there is an unlimited supply of things. They're called ideas. So there is an unlimited supply of a certain kind of thing and a limited supply of other things, and quite obvious. So I think it's actually pretty important. There's something about the growth narrative that is deeply Philistine and very upsetting, but I'm not against growth. In fact, I'm for growth, but obviously I'm for ecologically sustainable growth. It's just completely obvious. The reason that politicians and business people want growth is because it makes their job easier. And modern growth, there's a mania for rationalisation which got going sort of around about the time of Napoleon, actually, the Code Napoleon. All the time zones got fixed up. Now, that's a good thing, really. I mean, that kind of worked out for us. But this mania to fix this system, I mean, if you're running BHP or some large company, what's eating you? Well, growth's eating you. Everybody's saying more growth. We've built this institution to say more growth, please. And if you're a politician, then it was much easier for John Howard than it was for any of the people who followed him, because every time he looked in the kitty, there was another $5 billion there. And he gave it out and made his life easy. So that's now people themselves seem to have a much less strong desire for growth. I think growth is a healthy thing, but obviously not ecologically unsustainable growth. I don't want to get richer, but I want to grow. Okay, I'm rich enough, if that makes sense.
Time for one more question.
could redesign the government from scratch, how would you do it so as to incorporate some of the things that you're talking about?
It's so hard, and that raises... Let me show you another picture. One is a picture of a river delta, and the other is a picture of a lung. And what you've asked me is like saying to the bronchia, or it's like saying to the river, what should the delta look like? Do you get what I'm saying? In other words, you've asked me for a policy that I can introduce at the top level because I'm a benevolent dictator, and it's going to make things better. But if I have to make things better in a hospital, I just have to have all the nurses and all the doctors and everybody else doing their job well. That's a really hard thing. So I don't know what I can say. I don't know any policy I can introduce. A few I can think of to get rid of. But there was a marvellous expression. I don't think I should have it on my slides. There's a marvellous expression by, I'll see if I can remember it, by Charlie Munger, who is Warren Buffett's right-hand man, fellow billionaire from a Norman Rockwell painting. And he says that his idea of utopia amongst human beings is a seamless web of deserved trust. And our political discourse isn't talking like that. But that's my idea of what I'd like. I just don't know quite how to get there except through the small act small and large, of seeking to trust, of being trustworthy, and slowly trying to build the edifice.
Well, on that, I think, positive note, albeit challenging, please join me in thanking Nick for an excellent presentation.